So welcome everyone, and thank you for joining this Alliance annual meeting session, Bridging Forces in a Changing Context, Peacekeeping and Child Protection Actors, Advancing CAAFAG Prevention and Release Strategies. My name is Elspeth from the Alliance Secretariat team, and I'm delighted to be joined by Sandra Maignant, the Alliance CAAFAG Task Force co-lead on behalf of Plan International, and Shelley Whitman, the Executive Director of the Dallaire Institute. As you can see, Manami, if you can go to the next slide, please. As you can see, during this session, Shelley will first provide an introduction to the Vancouver Principles, and then Sandra will share emerging findings from a very timely study that explores the collaboration between United Nations peacekeeping and other child protection actors in the prevention of child recruitment, facilitation of release, and reintegration of children. Manami, please could you go to the next slide? Thank you. The study is part of a project being led by the Alliance with funding from the Government of Canada. It draws upon lessons and experiences from peacekeeping missions that are ongoing, so in South Sudan and the Central African Republic, as well as a mission that is in the process of drawdown and one that has recently closed. While the research is still ongoing, we are really pleased to be able to share some of the preliminary findings with you today and discuss how we can strengthen this collaboration to better protect children affected by armed conflict. In particular, I'm actually really excited about this session. It's a great opportunity for us to learn more about the Vancouver Principles and reflect, of course, on the interface with our work as child protection practitioners, and also hear some really pertinent findings. Sandra has conducted a wealth of interviews with diverse actors over the past weeks, so we're really going to hearing some extremely fresh and emerging findings from this critical study. So as you can see, we welcome questions and answers throughout, and we will hopefully have time at the end to answer some questions as well. But we encourage you to use the chat box or the Q&A function throughout to ask your questions, and we hope we can answer them. Before we jump into our first presentation, we would like to do a quick Mentimeter quiz with you, just to gauge the level of understanding that we have around the Vancouver Principles. So please, we'd be very grateful if you could join us. So you can see the QR code on the slide, as well as, can we put the link in there? Fantastic. Thank you, Pedro. The link is also in the chat box. So if you could please join the Menti. And we will go to our first question. So the first question, can be very honest here, is just how well do you know the Vancouver Principles? So some have never heard of the Vancouver Principles. Okay, so quite a mix, but minimum knowledge seems to be minimum knowledge and never heard of it. So that seems to be the predominant answer, with some have some knowledge and then the smallest chunk having good knowledge of it. I think this is very helpful for us as we move ahead with the session. I can see Shelley nodding, so thank you so much. Moving to the next question, please. And again, in what year were the Vancouver Principles developed? So we have three choices here: 2016, 2017, 2019. Got a mix. Okay. All right, well, we can perhaps look at the answer. And the answer is actually 2017. So as we'll hear from Shelley shortly, they were launched in December 2017. Next question, please. Okay, so this is a true or false question. The primary focus of the Vancouver Principles is to prioritize the prevention of child recruitment in peacekeeping missions. True or false? Okay. I can't see how many people have answered, but oh, here we go. Okay. So an overwhelming majority so far saying, oh, true. A few more falses trickling in. Okay. I think we can look at the answer now. And the answer for this question is true. So if you go to the next, okay, so yes, the answer to the previous one was true. The main goal of the Vancouver Principles, as we will hear from Shelley, is to prevent the recruitment and use of child soldiers. Next question, true or false again? Only military personnel can implement the Vancouver Principles. Good. Great. I'm happy that these ones are intuitive, considering the knowledge of the Vancouver Principles is not super high. So that's really great to see. So let's look at the answer. And the answer for this one is false, as the majority of you guessed. So while the Vancouver Principles were developed with military actors in mind, of course, we'll hear this from Shelley, our in-house expert, but their effective implementation involves civilian components, police, child protection actors, and a plethora of other actors working in peacekeeping. So with that, I would like to hand the floor now to Shelley, who will give us an introduction to the Vancouver Principles. Thank you ever so much, Shelley.
Thank you, Elspeth, and thank you to the Alliance for having me with you all. It's bright and early here in Canada, so I hope that my voice is not too groggy for all of you. So please, if I can see the slides come up at this point, I just want to say to all of you that I do hope that this introduction to the Vancouver Principles for some and for others, maybe a bit of an enhancement of knowledge, is something that I'm happy to continue to share with people. If there are questions and you want to be in touch with me and the Dallaire Institute, happy to do so following these sessions. So just for you all to be aware, the Dallaire Institute, and in particular myself, we were engaged to help co-draft the Vancouver Principles back in 2017 as part of what was then going to be the Defense Ministerial that was being held in Canada in November of 2017. Okay, next slide, please. So just wanted to give you a quick perspective on the Dallaire Institute for Children, Peace and Security, is that when we focus on our work, we're trying to implement this vision, a world where children are at the heart of peace and security, and change the perspectives in the way that we think about how we create peace and security around the world, where we give a prioritization to children. And our mission is to prevent recruitment and use of children in armed violence and to transform cycles of violence. We believe very much that we will not be able to achieve peace and security if we're not addressing this major grave violation. And when I state this, I want to also be clear that that means we have to understand all of the circumstances that lead to the potentiality of recruitment and use of children. And therefore, we're not just talking about one grave violation, we're talking about all of them and how that relates. However, when we focused on the Vancouver Principles, the reason why the Vancouver Principles were focusing on recruitment and use was also very much from the perspective of what the Canadian Armed Forces at the time had adopted in terms of a joint doctrine note. I'm happy to explain that more as we go along. Next slide, please. So in this particular developing of the Vancouver Principles, the Dallaire Institute had done a lot of work on security sector response and approach. We were founded by a retired lieutenant general who was head of the UN peacekeeping mission in Rwanda in 1994. And that kind of experience has driven our perspective. So in terms of overall assessments of understanding our work, we know that there were international laws that already exist, child protection mechanisms and organizations, and a lot of work on DDR, but not enough to look at what was the necessary response and approach that was needed from the security sector, who many times are often the first point of contact for children in such contexts. Next slide, please. We focus on 3 core competencies, and these 3 core competencies have really been important because they have driven some of the impact of the creation of the Vancouver Principles. We originally created these core competencies back in 2013, and there was a lot of work we were doing with the United States Institute for Peace at that time to help with developing these. And I'll just quickly highlight that, first of all, we have to have a clear understanding of the definition that we're looking at and how that impacts our knowledge of what to look for, how to react, and how to prevent. Second, that the defense and security sector actors have to see this as a unique security concern that demands their sector's unique attention and not something that is only to be dealt with by child protection actors or social and welfare actors within a national context. And that last point is that the defense and security sector actors have to understand the importance of effective reporting, collaboration with other concerned parties, and how to integrate those community perspectives into their work. So that linkage to the work of others in other sectors, be it child protection as an example, is a critical part of the kind of core competencies that we would want all defense and security sector actors to be able to understand and implement. Next slide, please. So for the Vancouver Principles on peacekeeping and the prevention of the recruitment and use of child soldiers, again, 2017, there was the UN Peacekeeping Defense Ministerial in Canada. The aim of the Vancouver Principles was to address this critical gap in the prioritization of the protection of children in armed conflict and to operationalize it within domestic and international operations. And for those of you who don't have a military or a police background, I just want to really emphasize when we say the word operationalize, it means something very different to that particular sector, because operationalizing the principles was key to being able to talk about like how we were going to implement it into the way that the security sector operates. There are 17 distinct principles that are part of the Vancouver Principles, and those 17 distinct principles that we have range from things like mandates to planning to thinking about early warning and thinking about things like the creation of child protection focal points for military and police. But in all of these particular principles, preventing recruitment and use of children had to be seen as critical for mission success and for operational effectiveness. So not a side issue that you deal with once you've dealt with all of the other kind of major points that you might think are important for preparation for your role as a military and police officer, but central to what it means to be effective in those roles. And so preparation and military, police, but also of civilian staff and peacekeeping missions is really necessary for appropriate and preventative action. That also means all of those actors understanding their roles and their unique roles and how they complement one another, not trying to take over one's roles, but to be very clear about where you fit within that spectrum. There are currently 107 countries that have endorsed the Vancouver Principles, and endorsing states are encouraged to implement the Vancouver Principles. I want to also highlight that important point of the word endorse, because that has been sometimes a sticking point with nations who are considering endorsing. We use the word endorse because we wanted to make sure that this was something that was not viewed as punitive, but something that was viewed as in an approach that you wanted to engage in. Okay, so it's encouraging, but endorsing does not mean that there's punitive action for you if you don't implement all aspects of the Vancouver Principles. And I also wanted to highlight that the Vancouver Principles don't need to be implemented in all of their entirety of the 17 principles. They can be done in an incremental approach, and it doesn't need to mean that just because you've endorsed this, that every single principle has to be implemented immediately. So that way that we were trying to focus on the Vancouver Principles was to encourage and provide capacity and to also help with that implementation. The implementation guidance also exists for the Vancouver Principles, and that was also a very consultative approach that was taken to create guidance that would go along with the principles. We felt it was very important to have that. That's also available online for those of you who may be interested to see it. But the guidance was not meant to be prescriptive, but to aid in ideas and approaches and tools that existed. Next slide, please. So in terms of operationalizing the Vancouver Principles, here are some examples that I just wanted to put up here for you to understand. It could be about how we develop, adapt, or interpret rules of engagement that may already exist. It could be about conducting specialized child protection training. It could be about creating focal points dedicated to this within your security institutions. It could be things like developing aide memoirs, scenario-based training, etc. Thinking about intelligence, assets, and analyzing child recruitment patterns and linkages. Things related to where your patrol-based locations are or your routes to deter exploitation of children, timing, etc. So these are just some examples of what operationalizing the VP looks like. Right, next slide, please. So Vancouver Principle number 2 talks about the need to prioritize the prevention of the recruitment and use of child soldiers in the strategic and operational planning of all peacekeeping operations. It's really important that every security sector organization conducts methodical operational planning. And in that planning, we have got to make sure that outside factors and factors that are really relevant to protecting children and preventing their recruitment and use is part of that planning. In terms of some of the strategic level planning factors, I also wanted to just highlight, these are some of the things to consider when we're looking at what the strategic level planning factors may be. Local conditions, right, that might contribute to recruitment and use. So understanding the context that you're in, the host nation capabilities or willingness to counter recruitment and use. Maybe they are also the violator themselves, so you need to understand that. What are the characteristics of the population? If the majority of the population has a demographic characteristics that say that, 50% of the population is below the age of 16, that can be a huge factor for you to consider in terms of the context that you are deploying in. So what are these recruitment trends? How are children used? What are some of the gender dynamics associated with recruitment and use? Often lack of understanding or not assessed very well by many of the peacekeeping troops that may be deployed, and whether or not there are child protection actors in the context you're in. And I just wanted to kind of highlight here for you that while we're talking about this in terms of peacekeeping, I wanted to make it very clear that the responsibility in terms of implementation of the Vancouver Principles lies at a national level. And many of the conflict situations that we see right now don't actually have formal UN peacekeeping missions, but they may be bilateral missions, or they may be missions where troops are there to advise and assist and train, and understanding that this is still a very important part of all of those particular types of roles that may be undertaken. Okay, next slide, please. So a really key principle within the Vancouver Principles that separates it a bit from other child protection frameworks that exist is VP 13 on mental health. And this is a perspective that is very important in terms of thinking through like the impacts of encountering children within a conflict setting. And it's not just in terms of seeing children on a battlefield. Some of the important work we've been looking at in terms of moral injury refers to things like the lasting emotional, psychological, social, behavioral, and spiritual impacts of actions that violate a service member's core moral values and behavioral expectations of self and others. The point here is that it can really be very traumatic and challenging for many peacekeepers to be in situations where they're seeing children suffer, or they're unable to, because of the institutional policies, to be able to address violations that they may see. And these kind of moral transgressions that occur can have lasting impacts long beyond the time that they are deployed in missions, and therefore can have a deep impact on the operational effectiveness of the individuals as well as the families and communities that they come back to. So this part is a very important part of complementing the child protection approach and work, and brings together these two perspectives within the Vancouver Principles. Next slide, please. I'm not going to go through this because of time, but just as an example with the Dallaire Institute, when we work on the scenario-based approach to the training, we really emphasize that there's a spectrum of interactions that can occur. And this has been done through a lot of research and work directly over the last 16 years. And really want to emphasize that this is where we have to go beyond a classroom setting of teaching about frameworks and principles and child protection aspects to understanding the realities that the security sector may face and how they may see children, and how we need to work with them to give them tools and approaches of how to behave in such interactions. Next slide, please. Again, not enough time for me to go through all of these things, but a tool that we use at the Dallaire Institute is called ADAPT. And this tool is what we use when we do the scenario-based training for the security sector to understand how to assess the situation, determine the intent, adopt a course of action, perform the course of action appropriately, and then transmit a report. This ADAPT model is something that we developed before the Vancouver Principles were created, but it emphasizes the focus of what the VP are about. Next slide, please. So again, just examples of prevention-oriented scenario-based training, the needs to be able to analyze, assess, have intelligence, but also understand how to react in these contexts is very important. Just a few examples from some of our trainings in spots around the world. And I would also just say, when we are thinking about the responses by the security sector, we have to think about whether they have a short response time or a long response time. And that can impact the way in which you employ these two main ethical imperatives that exist for the security sector. Very important to understand in the training and approach and those realities that can exist. Okay. My last slide, as I finish up because of time here, is that in terms of the Vancouver Principles, we always want to emphasize that you don't do prevention work in the middle of conflict. Prevention has to be done long before we get into situations of either being deployed or being faced with internal conflicts in the countries and spaces and places in which we work. And when it comes to the Vancouver Principles, it's really important to recognize that instability exists both when we're transitioning out of peacetime or into peacetime, and therefore the need for focusing on how to prevent recruitment and for aspects related to security sector reform, as well as peacekeeping, as well as thinking from this perspective of prevention in a larger lens of peace and stability, is really important in both those particular periods. And we should think of this continuum as a really critical piece to how we're going to be able to increase peace and stability around the globe. So thank you for listening. I know it was a bit rushed, but I'm here to answer any questions that I can. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Shelley, for that really comprehensive overview. I definitely learned a lot, and I'm sure others did too. So if you have questions, as I mentioned before, please do feel free to use the Q&A function and or the chat box to ask your questions. Please feel free to ask any questions that you have. And I'm now going to hand the floor to my colleague Sandra, who's going to present to us the preliminary findings of the study we're conducting. Thank you.
Thank you, Elspeth, and thank you, Shelley, for this great introduction to the Vancouver Principles. So I'm going to talk about this study that I've been working on, and here are just some preliminary findings. So I'm still analyzing all the data, so it's like a first snapshot of some of the results. This study is being implemented on behalf of the task force on CAAFAG. Next slide, please. So the purpose of this study is to look at the collaboration between the peacekeeping mission and the child protection actors, particularly around the prevention of child recruitment, the identification and release of children, and their reintegration. So it's looking really at how the two interact for these different elements. And so we've started with the setup of a reference group. And the focus of this reference group was to validate the data collection tools, and then they will do like the review of the working paper at the end. This research is being conducted in 4 countries. So it's in DRC, South Sudan, Central African Republic, and Mali. Most of it is being done remotely, with the exception of Central African Republic, where I'm going to go in the next few weeks. So I've conducted about over 50 interviews so far with different actors, national, international actors, people also sitting in global positions to really understand how this collaboration works. And then the findings and the results will be published in a working paper towards the end of the year. That will also include recommendations. Next slide, please. Next. So before I dive into like the findings of the study, I wanted to just do a quick reminder of the different steps of the process of release and reintegration of children. So in the countries where it's possible, there is a negotiation that is done with the parties to the conflict. So these are like armed groups, sometimes with governments as well. And this negotiation can lead to the signature of agreements or action plan or handover protocols that will include the prevention of child recruitment. So then the different parties to the conflict commit to not recruit any child. And this negotiation is done by different actors. When there are peacekeeping missions, this is one of the key roles that they play. It's like this negotiation, like military to military, and usually that works better. But other actors also play this role. This can be other UN agencies like UNICEF or OCHA, for example. And in some countries, the civil society can also be involved. Then you have the awareness raising and then the advocacy that is done on the prevention of child recruitment. And they can use these agreements that have been signed to really enforce the prevention of child recruitment. And this is done by all of these actors, so like the peacekeeping missions, the NGOs, but also the community. So the community can really use these resources and then go to the, sometimes directly to the armed groups, for example, and reinforce the point. They also do prevention work at the community level with the families and children to prevent child recruitment. Then you have the phase of identification of the children who have been recruited and used. And identification can be done when children are still in the armed group or the armed force, but it can also be done once children have self-demobilized and then they are back into their communities. Then you have the verification and release process. So the verification is more linked to the MRM, so the monitoring and reporting mechanism, where children are verified as being recruited. And sometimes it comes with a release process when children are still within the armed force or the armed group. And then they can transition to the reintegration phase, where you have all of the actors, mainly from the civil society, but also where the government often play a key role. Next slide, please. So now I'd like just to focus a bit more on prevention and use, prevention of child recruitment and use. So there are some good practices that I've identified, like through all the key interviews that I've done, the key informant interviews. And one of the very first things is that the action plan, the agreements, and the handover protocols that are signed are very useful to facilitate the prevention of child recruitment. It's like really an engagement of those parties to the conflict to say, yes, we're not going to recruit children. We sign a document. And that's really helpful then to advocate, to reinforce this point with them. Often the signature of these action plan agreements is quite long. So really it's a big achievement when this is done. We see also countries where there are child protection focal points within the military or within police services as well, which are very helpful to, again, reinforce the point of prevention of child recruitment. When children are arrested, for example, I send to the police, then the police officers, they know that this child should not be held in prison, for example. So there is all these focal points that keep reinforcing the point. The technical groups, so this is a setup that I've seen particularly in some countries like DRC and South Sudan, where you have the government, the government focal points, and then the peacekeeping mission when they're present, and UNICEF. And so with these technical groups, they meet every month and then they keep reinforcing the points. And this is a very good way to indirectly reinforce the points. So instead of pointing fingers and saying, have you not recruited any child? Let's go and check. Through these technical groups, they indirectly reinforce the point of prevention of child recruitment through this child protection focal points. Their task is then to go back to their services and make sure there are no children being recruited. And that's a really good way of doing it in a more sensitive way instead of pointing fingers. So like, I found that was a very interesting approach. We see also the community networks, and there are countries where there is really a wide range of community actors everywhere at all the levels. We're doing really a lot of work on the prevention of child recruitment. These people are focal points, they've been trained, and they're really effective and really have this wide coverage, which is really impressive, particularly in countries like DRC, where I was really impressed by the coverage of these community networks. Now, there are some challenges in the prevention, and particularly in places where there is no action plans or no agreements that have been signed with the parties to the conflict. That can be for various reasons, but obviously it's a bit more difficult to negotiate with these armed groups. There are places where there is absolutely no negotiation or no interaction with the armed groups, and it's obviously a lot more difficult than to work on the prevention of child recruitment with the parties to the conflict. We also see that there are places where there is a lack of coordination between the child protection actors, the government, and the peacekeeping mission. So kind of everybody does is like prevention activities on their own, and it could benefit from a better coordination so that we don't work in the same locations. We can, avoid duplication and have a more efficient coverage. Next slide, please. So then there is the children and armed conflict agenda. And I think there is a missing slide, no? Isn't there not one before that on identification and release? Yes, okay, thank you. Yes, so the identification and release, there are some good practices there that I've also identified, and particularly around the awareness that is conducted by the peacekeeping missions and UNICEF with armed groups. So what I've heard from national actors in particular is that they say that when the peacekeeping mission do this first awareness with the armed groups, it's easier for them to go afterwards and then reinforce the point. So like really the mandate of the peacekeeping mission and other UN agencies really help to kind of do like the first awareness, make sure that those armed groups or armed forces understand the international humanitarian law, that child recruitment is forbidden by this law, and then the national actors and the community can go afterwards to then reinforce this point and then do the identification and release. So like going in that order is a lot easier. We see also children who self-release and they directly go to the peacekeeping bases, who are sometimes in very remote places where there are no other actors. And so literally you have children who leave the armed groups and then knock on the door of the peacekeeping base and say, here I am, we want to leave the armed group, can you help us? And they are the first point of contact with these children who self-exit. And so we've seen that in Mali, for example, in DRC, where those children find a safe place in very insecure and remote areas before being handed over to child protection actors, to the child protection unit of the peacekeeping missions. We see also that the presence of women as child protection focal point is really helpful to release particularly girls and has contributed to the increase of girls being identified and released. The logistics that is provided by the peacekeeping mission is also essential. There are a lot of places where there are no roads, where the locations where the children are completely inaccessible by road, and then you need an helicopter to actually go there. So the peacekeeping mission really play an important role in the release of these children, particularly if there are large numbers. So when you have 20, 30 children to release in one go, you need to have lots of means of transportation, logistics, and that's often provided by the peacekeeping mission very effectively. Now, again, there are some challenges, and there is particularly the verification missions. They are sometimes a bit heavy and difficult to organize. So you have the identification that is done. So let's say a national actor says, we have identified 10 children in that location within this armed group. The children need to be first verified and then released. The verification mission in some places includes like UNICEF and the peacekeeping mission and government officials and NGOs, and it's like sometimes like 5 to 10 people that need to all coordinate their agendas to then go to a place for a 10-day mission. It's a lot of logistics and lots of planning. And by the time you organize it and you arrive, then the children are no longer there, or the mission is so visible that the children have been asked to hide somewhere, and the people, like, you don't find any child. There is all kinds of situations where there is really a lack of agility to respond. I mean, to be quick in going on those verification missions to verify and then release children. And that has an impact on the reintegration process. So we see, like, by the time the children are identified, and it can take like a few months until they are verified, and then they can enter into the reintegration process. And by that time, sometimes the organization who has identified the child is at the end of their reintegration program. They have like 2 months left, and children don't have access to all the services they could have if they were released earlier. Next slide, please. So in the children and armed conflict agenda, you have the element of monitoring and reporting on grave violations. One of the 6 grave violations is child recruitment and use. And there again, there is like a lot of coordination and collaboration between peacekeeping mission and the child protection actors. In terms of good practices, we see that the training that is done with various actors on how to document the 6 grave violation is very effective. And the more training, the more people, obviously, the better. There are places where you have really a whole range of actors at the community level. You have teachers who are trained, you have community leaders, national NGOs usually do this work to report on child recruitment and the other grave violations. There is also countries where there's one country where there is an online and confidential reporting mechanism, which has been really highlighted as safe and secure, and NGOs feel really comfortable reporting through that system, and they wouldn't otherwise. Because it can expose you to a lot of risk in reporting on those 6 grave violations. So in terms of challenges, we see that there is places where there is a lack of coordination and centralized MRM database. So sometimes you have an Excel sheet managed by UNICEF, another one managed by the peacekeeping mission, and then these need to be reconciled every month or every 2 months. You need to sit down, see like what are the cases that are duplicates, what are the same, what are the different ones, is there triangulation, and it takes a lot of time. So having a centralized database for MRM would be a lot easier. There is also different databases for the different violations. So you have some that are managed by, for example, WHO for like attacks on hospitals. Then there is attacks on schools, that is a different one. And so reconciliating all of these different databases is quite challenging. I see in the chat someone mentioning the MRM IMS Plus now, which is a great tool, and where it's implemented, it's being really efficient and very helpful. And I see, yeah, I believe Afghanistan and Mali are some of the places where it's being implemented now and rolled out, and indeed it's working really well. But it's not in all countries. So where it's not, we see really these challenges. The lack of access to unsecure areas, particularly in the situation of drawdown of the peacekeeping mission. We see like actors now who are not feeling so comfortable going to places because there isn't the protection of the peacekeeping mission anymore. So that has affected documentation. And in places where there is no anonymous reporting system, it is also extremely challenging. So there are places where it's impossible to report because that would put you in too much risk. So having this online and confidential reporting system would really help actors to feel safer to report. Next slide. So the reintegration. Reintegration is not part of the mandate of the peacekeeping mission, but we see they still play an important role in reintegration in some countries. So for example, there are places like DRC where the peacekeeping mission has supported the reintegration of children for the funding of transit centers, of like reintegration kits. They also have what they call the quick impact projects. So these are like 3-month projects where the community identify something that they want to address, a problem they want to address in their community. And they usually, these are things like fixing a bridge, repairing the classroom, like repairing the roof of the clinics, things like that. And that also contributes to the reintegration of children who go back to a community where there are functional services. So they do sometimes directly support reintegration and other times indirectly. I also want to highlight the key role that the CPOR is playing in the coordination of reintegration. So when you have children identified and then part of the reintegration process, the CPOR basically coordinates like all the referrals. So, you know, you have like different locations, and so every actor can say, yes, I have like MXPSS support available for this child. Another actor can say they have vocational training support available. Another one can offer case management and so on. And so like that, if one organization doesn't have the resources to cover all the needs of the child, they can coordinate all the services for the children. And that's been really effective. We see also the community approach to mitigate stigmatization as being really important, like involving the community-based child protection mechanism, the RECOPE, for example, in some countries, who have like prepared the community before the reintegration of children. Now we see some challenges, and we see that the fact there is less and less funding available for child protection in general, but also for reintegration, does affect obviously the reintegration of children, but also the release. There are places, there are countries where children are identified, they are verified in the armed groups, but then they're not released until there is reintegration support available. And it's because the children basically have no food, some of them have no parents, so they have nowhere to go. So if this reintegration support is not available, basically children are not released. And it's part of the negotiation. So some children basically don't want to leave. They're like, well, if you have no support to offer me, I'm better off in the armed group where I have access to food than being, you know, alone in my community with, you know, no parents or nowhere to go. And it's also an argument to negotiate with the armed groups leaders, where we negotiate that those children will be better off in the community, they should go back to school and so on. But if the service is not available to support them, then it really affects the negotiation process. So although, you know, we may think at this as different steps, reintegration is directly linked to the release. We see also places where there are issues with the timely referral of cases. So you have some actors who have identified a child in or a group of children in an armed group. They're waiting for funding to come to fund the reintegration. And so they will hold on the release of a child until that reintegration support is available, instead of referring the children to another actor who would have already funding available for the reintegration. So we see a bit of competition in some places, which affects the timely exit of the children from the armed groups. There are high risk of recruitment, obviously, if the reintegration is not well done and where there is not enough funding, but also funding that is long enough to support the children over time. And insecurity affects also the reintegration greatly. Next slide. So now just I'd like to focus a bit on girls. Girls face a lot of barriers to their identification and release. And so we see in the numbers, like although it's likely that there are more boys than girls who are being recruited, it's extremely challenging to identify and release girls. And this is for various reasons. One of them is the role that girls play. They are often used as wife for sexual exploitation or for domestic tasks, like washing clothes or the dishes. And so there is a misunderstanding from still some actors that these girls are more into a situation of child marriage rather than being considered as recruited and used. And so it's actually both. Like girls are both survivors of early marriage, of child marriage, and they are CAAFAG. And so it's an additional vulnerability for them. And so there is sometimes, this misunderstanding that these girls are not considered as CAAFAG. And so, of course, the approaches are different to release these girls. And there is a lot of pushback from the commanders, from the soldiers who is saying, well, this is my wife. So she's not fighting. So she's not a CAAFAG. So the strategies need to be adapted to facilitate their exit. The presence of children is another key issue because there are, again, like some actors who feel uncomfortable releasing these girls, feeling that they're promoting divorce, basically. And then who is going to provide for this child? And then this girl will be left alone with her child, and it's going to be very challenging. But it's not really for us to take the decision, but it's for the girl, particularly those who are 16 and above, to take an informed decision about whether she wants to stay or leave with all the information about the services that are available for her. And, so we need to share that information. So there are strategies to access these girls and providing services for their children, for example, so that they can leave the house and then they can have access to all of this information and then take the decision. So these are, again, like strategies that can be put in place. The stigma that they face when they go back to their community and their family is extremely high. It's much higher for girls than for boys. And so again, like a lot of preparation of those communities and families is important before the girls are reunified and return to their communities. And there is also a lack of gender-sensitive reintegration programs. Like, still too often, we program the same way for boys and for girls, but the needs are completely different. The roles are different. The level of stigma is different. So we really need to adapt our programs. And doing gender-sensitive programs is not just providing a dignity kit for girls. It's providing for their children. Do we have baby kit? If we provide food, we need to provide food for the girl and for the children. If the girls want to access services, we need to provide for daycare so that they can attend the activities the same way as boys. So it's like all of these strategies, all these programs that need to be adapted. So we give the same chance to girls as for boys to be reintegrated. And can you move to the next slide, which is my last slide? So to conclude, I'd like to highlight the key role that community actors play in the prevention, the release, the reintegration, and also for the monitoring and reporting on grave violation. In the context of reduction of funding on child protection, in the context of drawdown of peacekeeping mission, like those community actors play a vital role. They are the one in the field, on the ground, like collecting the data, taking the risk. There are places where the peacekeeping mission cannot go, and it's the community actors who go and collect the data. So it's really crucial that we empower these actors with training. We also provide financial support to these national organizations and community-based organizations so that they can do the work and they have the resources to do it well. It's also important to reinforce the focus on girls, and then that the strategies, for identification, release, and reintegration are different and they need to be adapted. And actually, I'd like to remind everyone that the CAAFAG Task Force has developed a technical note specifically on girls with a set of recommendations on how to program specifically for them. And thank you, Manami, for putting the link in the chat. And my last point is around coordination among all the actors. Coordination is really essential. Like, we need to clarify the role, who is doing what. Like, we cannot afford having competition, having like different, no coordination and leading to duplication of work. So it's critical to better coordinate to then swiftly identify and respond to the needs of children. Thank you. I know I was a bit longer, so apologies. Hope we still have a few minutes for Q&A.
Thank you so much, Sandra. And just to flag, you're getting lots of claps from the participants. I think it really was extremely insightful, and thank you so much for sharing these with us. So there's a couple of questions in the Q&A function. The first one I think I'll direct to Shelley around would we say that the Vancouver Principles is the tool to support keeping tabs on monitoring and reporting the grave violations on recruitment and use of children in armed forces and groups. Sandra did touch a little bit upon this, but then just the link specifically with the Vancouver Principles. It'd be fantastic if you could speak to that.
Yeah, I think the importance of what Sandra was presenting and the links to the Vancouver Principles are this, that it's not necessarily the only tool, but it's one of the tools to really help ensure that when we're thinking about recognizing, reporting, monitoring on issues related to violations against children, we can't have that accurate information and approach if the peacekeeping missions, and in particular the police and military that are deployed to those missions, if they're not trained on what to recognize and report and how to see it. I often say there's an important aspect in terms of them understanding these matters, and beyond just seeing like what those violations are, like how would they interact, how would they see it, how would they recognize it. So it is a really important piece to it, because without addressing that, then you don't have that complementarity that will help to support the child protection actors and their roles and responsibilities and supporting the missions. So this piece is kind of like that link that has to exist there. And that's why if we can improve the kind of training and approach prior to going into missions, then we will already have a base knowledge that can then be applied to the context of wherever they may be deployed.
Thank you so much, Shelley. And then the second question we received, I think, is Sandra, for you, around the challenges on the long time that it takes to verify and release children, which in the end affects reintegration. And over the course of the working paper so far, have you been able to identify any promising practices on how this process could be fast-tracked? Any specific advocacy points and stakeholders to be engaged?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, you know, you don't need to have everyone in the same mission to verify. I think having, you know, if, well, first of all, if the actors are well trained, the verification should be very easy. So like the more training you do with the actors who do the identification, the better, because basically the verification is just like a quick, you know, almost tick the box, because all the information are there, it's well documented. And then second, so the verification is to be done by a UN actor, so it's UNICEF or the peacekeeping mission. And I think that's been done already. Like you don't need to all be there. It can be UNICEF or the peacekeeping mission. One or the other can do the verification. And that's easier, you know, to go quicker to the places to verify. Now, the issue that remains is insecurity. And there are places where actually UNICEF cannot go without the presence of the peacekeeping because it's too unsafe. And that's where we need to find other ways to basically cross-check the information. And so you can triangulate the information in different ways. That would allow you the verification and then immediately the automatic release. So it's just to be more flexible and less, I would say, rigid in some places, where, you know, just to be more agile, go with the flow. Like you don't need to have 10 people on a mission to verify a child. Like it needs to be, yeah, more agile, I would say.
Great. Thank you so much, Sandra. So we're coming to the end of the session, and I just wanted to flag two things very quickly before we have the last Mentimeter. Sandra, I think there's a lot of interest in the participants here today in the working paper. So in a nutshell, could you just give us a quick update on next steps and potentially when we can hear more, because I think there's a lot of interest. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. So there is still some more data collection that will take place. So as I said, in person, in car, and then a few more remotely. And then I will do like a validation workshop in each of those countries with the people who have contributed to the research. So it's not open to everyone. And then during, let's say, the summer until September, there will be the drafting of the working paper that will be then reviewed by the reference group. And then we hope for a launch around October, November, with a translation in French.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And then also just a quick flag that there's been lots of great participation in the chat as well, just for the recording. There's been some fantastic comments around good practices, around child protection focal points in governments, and some of the challenges of DDR around girls. So thank you so much for all of these rich comments. So if you could please just quickly go to the last Menti link, and this is really important for our monitoring and evaluation purposes. There's just 2 quick questions that we would love if you could answer. So the first question, if you could see the link in the chat, I think we just bump up the link as well because there's been some comments, so I'll put it again. So if you could just go to the Menti link. The first question is just, did you increase your technical knowledge on children in conflict settings through your participation in this session? So I just leave a moment. Okay, fantastic. I can see a resounding yes here, so that's fantastic, Sandra and Shelley. And then the second question, if we can move to the next question, given that we did have a specific focus around the specific issues and challenges related to girls associated with armed forces and armed groups, did you increase your knowledge of lessons learned and recommendations in this regard? Yes. Okay. Okay. Fantastic. All right. So we'll just let the last few answers trickle in, and I can see we're a couple of minutes over, so apologies for that, but thank you so much to Sandra, to Shelley for all of the incredible work and for all of the really active participation. We hope that you'll all stay tuned for the next phases of the working paper. And then finally, just to flag that this session is closing, but we do invite you to stay with us because for the next 30 minutes, we will be having a participant networking session. It will be in English and it will be around the theme of this year's annual meeting, which is related to ground-up approaches to protecting children. So please stay tuned, and I will hand over now to my colleague Joy, who's going to lead us through this really exciting networking. Thank you so much.